Sup you beautiful people. Hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome back to another new episode of What If Deku Becomes a Pokemon Trainer. In this story, it is simply what you might expect. The story of My Hero Academia, but in world filled with not only quirks, but also Pokemon. If you guys enjoy this what if, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel, after watching this video. Before we get into it though, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. Third POV. Pathetic. Todoroki sighed. The white and red-haired teen walked down the landslide zone, his owl and Ninetales by his side, and dozens of villains and their Pokemon frozen in place. The plan was to scatter us and kill us. Todoroki asked to the shivering frozen villains. Don't make me laugh. With your skills, you fools look like you hadn't had a day of training in your lives. You haven't the slightest idea how to use your quirks or your Pokemon in that regard. This power. One of the frozen villains shivered out. He froze us the instant we attacked. The ground cracked and opened up suddenly behind them, a Trotigan popping and charging at Todoroki. Todoroki scoffed. Ninetales. Immediately, Ninetales fired a blinding dazzling gleam, Trotigan howling in pain and covering his eyes and body, as he was pelted by the radiant energy, only for him to be suddenly blasted into a boulder by an aurora beam. The dust settled and showed the cave Pokemon laying on the debris, unconscious. That kid, he's no human. Another of the frozen villains grunted out. He's a demon. So is that Pokemon. Todoroki continued walking past the frozen enemies without any care, his attention inwards to his thoughts. How did they plan to kill All Might? Todoroki thought, remembering the leaders, the one with the hands, words when he and the villains first appeared, and the warp villains' words back at the entrance. At first, I thought they gathered a force of elite criminals to overpower him. The villain jumped out of the cover and rushed him with a knife, another coming at him from behind with a spear. Todoroki quickly sidestepped, grabbed the spear of the villain behind him and unleashed his quirk, the two villains becoming instantly frozen. But that can't be true. Todoroki continued thinking, ripping the spear out of the avian-looking villain's grasp, who fell to the ground. Most of these villains are low-level thugs, just pawns. He recalled the warp villain, the leader with the hands, the leader's Hydreigon, and the large dark purple creature. By my count, there were only 4 or maybe 5 truly dangerous enemies here. A few meters away, a villain cowered in fear behind a large boulder. He froze them all. He whispered terrified. They couldn't even scratch that guy. And his Pokemon, Arceus, what did he feed him? He peeked out to see that Todoroki was looking away from him, not moving. He looks like he's distracted and he hasn't noticed me yet. Good. He raised his hand, a large rock floating by it. With the clench of his fist, it compressed and formed into a spike. If I steady myself, I can fire this at him before he even notices. Unbeknownst to the villain, who had his sight focused on Todoroki, a large rock was lifted behind him. I got the high ground, so I can easily fire on him from here. The villain chuckled and floated the rock before him and aimed at Todoroki, his side on his head. That brat won't see this, Komi, whack. Todoroki heard a disturbance and quickly turned to his left. Before he fired his quirk, he noticed the villain on the ground, clearly unconscious and a bloody mark on his head. A rock dropped beside the villain, its flat surface marked in his blood. Phew, that was a close one. Todoroki whirled towards the sound of the familiar voice. Standing above the villain was a pair of boots and gloves wiping each other. Thought he was getting the drop on you, Todoroki. You're the invisible girl, Higakure, right? Todoroki asked. The one and only. Higakure said back cheerfully, her gloves over where he presumed her head was a flash 2 fingers and a peace sign. Glad you remembered. By her side, a Kecleon phased in, shutting of his camouflage move. When did you get here? Todoroki asked further, confused. Oh, I was here the whole time. Higakure answered as she walked towards him. Got warped here by that warp villain, like you. But when those villains showed up and you started freezing their butts off, I thought it was better to hide than accidentally get myself frozen. I suppose that was for the best. Todoroki replied, a sweat drop over his head. I didn't notice her. I really could have accidentally frozen her. So is that all of them? Higakure asked. Appears so. Todoroki replied. Well, I think we better get back to the entrance. Higakure said. There's a chance some of our classmates are still there, including Izzy. He can probably figure out what these villains are after. Todoroki narrowed his eyes, before turning back to the villain frozen beside him. These villains are all weak beside those 4. Even she can knock them out easily. Todoroki brought himself back to his thoughts. And if that's the case, then we need more information on their plans. And Midoriya is not the only one who can figure things out. You two, listen well. Todoroki said to the frozen villains. If you stay frozen like that, your cells will slowly die as your body succumbs to frostbite and hypothermia. The 2 villains gaped in fear. Todoroki walked up to the one with the knife, his fearful tears leaked out his eyes. Lucky for you, my intention is to be a hero, so I rather not resort to unnecessary cruelty. The half-cold, half-hot user raised his hand to centimeters away from the villain's unfrozen face, cold mist leaking out from his hand. The villain stared horrified at Todoroki's cold, mismatched eyes. But for me to do that, I need to know how you plan to kill All Might. That's the only way you all can survive. So cold. Higakure shivered, both from fear and cold, as she watched from afar. By the shipwreck zone, Izuku, Serena, and Asui were walking away from the remains of the ship, leaving behind the group of villains and their Pokemon frozen in the large block of ice. Once Asui landed and found the water only reaching up to her waist, the two figured that they can walk the rest of the way. Serena and Asui returned their Pokemon back to their Pokeballs, the only one to remain out being Pikachu, who refused to return the death trap as the yellow rat called it, and chose to stand on Izuku's shoulder. Serena looked back to the drifting block of ice full of villains. Yep, they're frozen. She stated the obvious. With all those combined ice beams, they aren't going anywhere soon. Nice plan as always, Iz. Can't believe we managed to get all of them at once. What if there were some reserves underwater or by the ends of the lake that we didn't know? It was such a gamble. Maybe we should have had Asui's Palpitate use its vibrations to map the area. Jiro or Shoji could have been useful for that too. Serena deadpanned as Izuku was currently stuck in another of his infamous mutterings. You're creeping us out. Asui blankly said. Stop it. Please. Izuku snapped out of his muttering and turned to Asui. Second-guessing ourselves isn't going to get us anywhere, so shouldn't we figure out our next move? Yeah, that sounds good. Izuku said before cringing, looking to his left gloveless hand. His middle finger and thumb were clearly broken, the fingers purple and swelled. Are you okay? Asui asked, Serena quickly rushing to Izuku's side and inspecting his hand. Yeah, I'm alright. Izuku replied. In that blast, I used 100% on them. We should get them healed. Serena said worryingly. Bring out Eevee. He can heal them with Heal Pulse. Yeah. Eevee agreed with her from his Pokeball. I second that, boss. Pikachu agreed as well. No? Izuku said. I'm alright. Don't worry about me. We should make getting help our top priority. Izuku brought the black wrist guard down his arm and wrapped it around his left hand. We should use Eevee's Heal Pulse on a more serious injury. Alright. Serena sighed in defeat, knowing full well that nothing was going to change Izuku's mind. So what's the plan, Izu? Izuku pointed to the area between main entrance and the entrance to the Squall Zone. There. Izuku said. If we follow the shore to near the exit, then we can avoid the central plaza entirely. Good idea. Asui said. That way we won't run into the villains Mr. Oz was facing over there. The three looked to the central plaza, the various explosions, and sounds of fighting from that direction. Izuku looked worryingly at the area his teacher is fighting. Yeah, but can he handle them on his own? Izuku thought. He's got Cofagrigus, Malamer, and Behian with him, so he should have plenty of backup. But, he thought back to the villain with the hands, the Hydreigon, and that thing, even now feeling repulsed at the thought of it, his whole being feeling an overwhelming sense of dread and unease. But, if he doesn't get back up, he's going to overexert himself. Izuku said aloud, drawing Serena and Asui's attention. There's only so many villains he can take, and his quirk is useless against their Pokemon. His Pokemon may be aiding him now, but they too can only go for so long facing so many enemies. But Izu, we can't just interfere. Serena said. We barely managed to get past all those villains by ourselves, and we aren't ready to fight the rest of them yet. We probably get in Mr. Ozawa's way than help. Erbit. Asui nodded. I'm not saying that we should jump into the fight or get involved. Izuku replied, looking back at them. But perhaps we should get close and watch, see if he needs help. If worse comes to worse, our Pokemon can help deal with them long-ranged, and we can defend ourselves with our quirks more easily if we aren't in his way. And if Mr. Ozawa's got it, then we go to the entrance and regroup with the others. Alright. Serena and Asui looked at each other worried before turning back nodding. Izuku nodded back, the three slowly making their way to the shore, unaware of the true danger waiting for them. Mountain Zone. AHHH. Kaminari yelled as he ducked and ran from a large villain's swipe. These dudes are terrifying. My whole life just flashed before my eyes. Kaminari's hero costume was more similar to regular street clothes than an actual hero suit. He wore a simple white, V-neck t-shirt, a black popped collar jacket with silver lightning bolt designs on the shoulders going down his side and along his collar, and black pants with white lines going down the middle of his legs, and shoes. He also wore a radio antenna on a white earpiece over his right ear. Can you keep it down a few notches? Kyoka yelled as she pushed back a villain's large sword away with a sword of her own, its creator, Momo, knocking another villain away with a bow staff. Her louder fired an echoed voice, blasting away the Carnivan attempting to bite him. Kyuka's hero suit was also similar to street clothes, consisting of a dark violet shirt with 2 tiers on the neckline of the shirt, a short black jacket that ran down to the top of her waist, white gloves, black, baggy pants, boots, and speakers on the ankles of her legs. She additionally wore red paint under her eyes in the form of triangles. Kaminari yelped as he ducked a rock throw, his Ellicott knocking away the offending Graveler with a brick break. Agreed, Momo said, her Kadabra firing on a Banette with a shadow ball while the rest grouped together. Right now we need to focus on getting away from these enemies. Around the teens were dozens of villains of varying size and quirks and similar size variety of Pokemon, all of them surrounding the few of Kaminari, his Ellicott and Sparky, Jiro, and her Loudred and Noibit, and Momo, and her Kadabra and Wartortle. Momo looked to a group of the villains' Pokemon, a Graveler, Golem, Boulder, and Karkle, launching rock tombs at them. Kadabra, defend with Psychic. Wartortle, trap the others in Whirlpool. As the rock tombs flew towards them, Kadabra's eyes glowed blue and thrust his glowing spoon out, making them magically, expanding rocks glow blue and hover in midair. Kadabra flung them back the enemy Pokemons and villains, knocking back a few, and some tossed at some of the flying Pokemon above, causing them to fall to the ground. Wartortle meanwhile created a swirling whirlpool and tossed it towards the enemy, trapping in few villain and their Pokemon in the watery prison. Then pull out a weapon for me too, Kaminari said, his eyes wide in fear. You're the one with electrical powers, Jiro retorted. Just sat them so we can run. Were you not paying attention during combat training? Some partner you were. Kaminari yelled out, as he held up his hand sparking yellow electricity. I can cover my body with electricity, but if I try to shoot it out, it'll go everywhere. I take you guys down along with me, and I don't think Yaoi Rosa's Wartortle preferred that either, or would you prefer shock treatment? The teen tapped his earpiece and continued with, I can't even call for help because there's still the interference jamming the signal. I'm useless in this situation and I'm counting on you guys. You're a real damsel in distress, Jiro said dryly as her eyes twitched in annoyance. Why did I have to get stuck with him? At least with Momo we got a shot. I would have much rather preferred Midoriya than him, at least he could beat these guys to a pulp. Kyoka suddenly blushed red at the last thought. Wait, where did that come from? Kaminari quickly jumped back, avoiding another swipe from the villain before. New idea, Jiro said as she kicked Kaminari towards the villain brute. You're my human stun gun. Seriously, Kaminari yelled as he bumped into the villain. Instantly, he and the villain were covered in yellow electricity, the villain howling in pain, while Kaminari remained unaffected. Whoa, hey, this is working. I'm super strong. Sit back you guys. You can count on me. You're exhausting. Kyoka groaned, before looking to her side, her jack extending down towards her feet. Try electrocuting solid rock kit. A villain with stretching arms yelled as he stretched his arm up, attempting to bring down a large boulder on Kaminari. Kyoka's earphone jack connected to the speakers on her boots and fired off a loud, powerful sound wave that sounded like a heartbeat. The sound wave instantly destroyed the rock into pieces. The man's stretchy arm collided with Kaminari's, and the villain joined his comrade in the electrocution. Another villain jumped up towards the girls with a pair of dual blade, only for Momo to toss a newly created net at the villain, who struggled to break free, before landing onto his comrade and become electrocuted as well. You're lucky that worked out so well, Momo said to Kyoka as she readied her bow's staff. Could have easily gotten him killed. I'm sorry. Kyoka apologized sarcastically. Next time I'll ask before saving our butts. Present Mick. Kyoka Jiro. Quirk. Earphone jack. Her ears have these wicked plugs that can extend and hear things around her like a radar. She can also shoot out her heartbeat into powerful sound waves by inserting those plugs onto her speakers and people's ears. Talk about crazy feedback. Damn it Kaminari. You couldn't have asked for some aiming gear in your costume request form. Loudred. Noibit. Mind bringing some more towards Kaminari? Kyoka ordered while she fired off another sound wave towards the enemy, causing them to clutch their ears in pain. Loudred fired off a boomburst onto a rushing Machoke, Melting, Wakhog, and Sither, them all flying off and colliding with the three villains, and crying out in electrocution as well. Noibit flew up and fired Supersonic, causing the affected Pokemon and their villainous trainers to stumble confusedly onto the pile of people to be electrocuted. Kadabra. Wartortle. Follow suit, with Psychic and Rapid Spin combo. Momo ordered too. Kadabra and Wartortle nodded, the turtle Pokemon retracting and spinning up with Rapid Spin, while Kadabra levitated the spinning Pokemon with Psychic. He launched the turtle Pokemon around, knocking several Pokemon and people into the group, before pulling back to not have Wartortle get caught. I'm feeling a little lightheaded here, Kaminari mumbled out, his face becoming dunce-like for a bit before shaking it off. Hey, Sparky, mind shooting down those flying types with Thunderbolt? And Ellicott, charge me up. Sparky jumped in action and fired a series of thunderbolts towards the remaining flying types still airborne, causing them to fall to the ground. Ellicott jumped towards his trainer, landing next to him, before he started rotating his arms in circles, generating electricity, as evidenced by the growing sparks between his two horns and body. It stopped rotating its left arm, lighting it up with Thunder Punch and touching Kaminari, the blonde, black lightning bolt-haired teen feeling a rush of electricity and fired off more, eventually stopping as all the villains and Pokemon quickly fainted. You finally made yourself useful there, Kaminari. Kyoka said before quickly jumping out of the way as a villain dropped down behind her and attempted to slash her. Momo vaulted herself over with her staff and kicked the villain away. "It's ready," Momo shouted, the back of her costume expanding out. "It takes me a little while longer to create an object this big." Popping and tearing out of the back of her costume was a large white sheet that covered her, Kyoka, and the rest of their Pokemon. "A blanket?" a villain questioned. "Is it supposed to be a shield or is it nappy time?" another villain asked condescendingly. Momo peeked her eye out, smirking. "You're looking at a sheet of insulation 100 millimeters thick. Go Kaminari." Kaminari smirked, wiping away the blood from his nose. "Badass," he said, his body sparking in electricity. "Now I don't have to worry about hurting my friends." Sparky, Ellicott, discharge, full ampage. Sparky and Ellicott spark with large amounts of electricity. "You guys are fried." Indiscriminate shock 1.3 million volts. A massive discharge of electricity fired off the hero student and his Pokemon, enveloping all of the remaining villains and their Pokemon, as they screamed in pain. The electricity fired off into the air and brought down any remaining or fleeing flying types into unconsciousness. As the electricity vanished, all of the villains and enemy Pokemon were on the ground, their bodies smoking and twitching in their unconscious states. Momo peeked her head from the sheet and inspected the downed villains. "Now, I'm worried about Izuku and the rest of our class," Momo said. "We should find them right away." "You're looking a little overexposed right now though," Kyoka shouted out. Momo looked down and realized that Kyoka had the right of it. Most of her hero suit was gone, torn up from creating that large of an object, leaving her almost fully naked aside from her shoulder and waist. Momo looked down at her naked breasts, her mind suddenly wondering into how Izuku would feel, should he see her like that. She blushed bright red before shaking herself from the thoughts, and the nosebleed on her nose, and turned to Kyoka. "I can make some new clothes, don't worry," she said in reply. "Yaoi Rozo is so punk rock," Jiro said, turning away from Momo's naked form after realizing that she was staring too long. "Midoriya must be so cool if he can make Yaoi Rozo and the others so interested." At that, Kyoka's chest started turning in a sensation she didn't quite understand. "As if I care." Jiro looked out of the sheet to notice Kaminari's form. She quickly went towards Momo and blocked her naked form from the electric teen. "Kaminari, don't you dare look," she yelled out. I don't think he's going to bother looking," Yaoi Rozo said as she gestured to Kaminari's current state. Said current state was Kaminari giggling like an idiot, his eyes comically idiotic, drool peeking out his agape mouth, while blood did to some down his nose, and his hands clenched with his two thumbs up, and thrusting his arms forwards and backwards. Present Mick. Denki Kaminari. Quirk. Electrification. He can produce and unleash his electricity from his brain to electrify enemies he touches or all around him, but if he goes over his wattage limit his brain short-circuits, and he becomes a huge idiot that even Slowbro would laugh at. Sparky sighed in a mixture of fondness and defeat, knowing full well of her trainer's weakness, while Ellicott facepalmed inside. As Kyoka and a newly clothed Momo came out of the sheet and watched as the teen was fumbling around, Kyoka said, "Never mind. We can't stay here long," Momo said. "The villains can wake up at any time. Let's sneak over to the entrance to see if Izuku is still there with some of the class." "You really care about Midoriya a lot, right?" Kyoka asked. Momo quickly blushed and stuttered out, "Of course I do. He and I are good friends. Good friends. I'll bet," Jiro said, her eyebrow raised. "You and the others practically cling onto him like glue." "Well, we are all friends with him," Momo replied, her blush growing higher. "Plus he's the class rep and I'm his deputy rep, of course we would hang out more." "Yeah, but I see the way you look at him," Jiro said. "And trust me, after 3 days, 4 if you count today, that's saying something." Momo's blush grew more heavy and redder. Jiro looked away with a thoughtful look before asking, "Hey, is it okay if I ask something?" Sure, what is it, Jiro?" Momo said. "Please, Kyoka's fine." Jiro waved off her last name. "But why do you like Midoriya so much?" Serena is an obvious tell since they were friends before Yue. Uraraka and Higakure said that Midoriya saved them from the zero-pointer during the exams, so I guess that's where it started from. Mina I think is just flirting, but I'm not so sure, and Asui is the only one that doesn't seem interested. At least for now, for all I know. But what has me confused is how you ended up obviously falling head over heels with him." Momo's eyes blinked in surprise, her fist clenching tight over her heart as she thought over her reasons for her attraction towards Izuku. Meanwhile, behind them, as Kaminari started fumbling his way over with Sparky in tow, a hand popped out of the ground, along with a pair of spikes. "Collapse zone. Say goodbye." Bakugo roared, unleashing an explosion onto 2 villains, who were sent flying and cracking the wall behind them. Bakugo, Kirishima, and their Pokemon were busy dueling against villains in the destroyed-looking building, Bakugo exploding people left and right, while Kirishima hardened his body and arms to block the villains' weapons, and knock them out. Hulava fired Flamethrower at the villains' Pokemon to keep them away and attack, used Quick Attack to dodge and get in close, and ran them down with Flame Wheel to attack as well. Kirishima's Quilladin 2 fought against the enemy Pokemon, Spiky Armor Pokemon, knocking the enemy back with Needle Arm and Brick Break, evading and attacking with Rollout, and attacking from afar with Pin Missile, Seed Bomb, and Rock Tomb. Kirishima blocked and broke the sword of a villain before chopping him with his hardened hand and knocking him out. Kirishima and Bakugo stood back to back, panting in slight exhaustion. That's the last of these guys. Bakugo panted out. Bunch of fucking weaklings. Alright, let's hurry and find the rest of our class. Kirishima replied, Kulava and Quilladin rushing back to their trainers. If we're both still in the USJ, then everyone else probably is too, and not all of them have the offense skills we do. We've gotta make sure they're safe. Kirishima clenched his fist and remembered how he and Bakugo charged against the warp villain. Especially when we screwed things up when we got in the way earlier. Midoriya was right. We should have held back and let 13 suck up the warp villain, then maybe we all wouldn't have gotten warped here. Kirishima looked to Bakugo, barely noticing the look of pure anger at the mention of Midoriya. We gotta make it up to them. You wanna track everyone down then have fun. Bakugo scoffed, glaring at nothing. But I'm going to go destroy that warping bastard. Huh? Kirishima said confused. Our physical attacks didn't even hurt that guy. Come on man, don't be an idiot. Shut up. Bakugo yelled at Kirishima, the two unaware of two camouflaged figures crawling on the roof behind them before dropping to the ground. I'm going to take him down because he's their way in and out. If I cut off their escape route, they'll be stuck here and get what they deserve. We'll just have to figure it out. Suddenly the two camouflaged figures sprung towards Bakugo from behind, one with a knife and the other with his claws extending. Hope you had fun chit-chatting. Too bad you let your guard down. Bakugo's hand lashed out and grabbed the invisible figure's head, exposing him to appear like a human mixed with a Kecleon, before slamming him to the ground with an explosion, knocking the villain out. The other was blasted with a flamethrower and crashed into the wall. The flames receded to reveal it was a Kecleon who only raised its head before it was slammed into by Kulava with quick attack, knocking it out. Anyway, if all these villains are small fries like these chumps, then our classmates can handle them, even shitty Deku. Bakugo said, holding up the knocked out villain's head before tossing him aside. That reaction time was insane. Kirishima gaped in surprise. Also, since when do you act so calm and rational? Usually you're all like, Kirishima imagined Bakugo with monster-like teeth shouting out die. 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 I'm always calm and rational, you red-haired loser. Bakugo roared out. Yeah, there you are. Kirishima pointed out with a smirk. The smirk faded into a thoughtful stare. And you're even more pissed off whenever I or anyone mention Midoriya. What's that all about? None of your fucking business, shitty hair. Bakugo growled out, more vehemently than before. Deku's just a shitty fucking loser that doesn't know his place, and his business in past with him means jack shit to any of you. Shitty? Loser? Kirishima thought confused. The Midoriya that I've seen was anything but a loser. Shitty. Doesn't know his place. That kind of talk sounds like something a bully would say. Rather, unmanly. Also, Deku. Why does he call him that, and what does it mean? Kirishima stared at the explosive blonde, his back was turned from him, with a frown, both confused and suspicious. Whatever. Bakugo growled out. Go find the others if you want to. Before Bakugo walked away, Kirishima said, hey, hold on. If you're taking down that warp guy then I'm in too. I too got a score to settle with him for warping us here too. And I think I get what you are saying about the others. You think that we shouldn't worry about the others, because you believe in them. And I can roll with that and say that's manly. Kirishima pounded his hardened fists with a confident smirk, Quilladin doing the same with his own. Bakugo, however, just stared at the Redeed before turning away once again to go after the warp villain. Meanwhile, in the fire zone. Damn, he's too fast. A villain said as a group of 3 of them, and their Pokemon, including Imarcargo, Heatmore, Houndoom, looked around the fiery zone for their target. The 3 split off, one of them and his Houndoom rushing down one path, Ojiro swinging down, and knocking the villain down with a solid chop to the neck. The Houndoom, before he could retaliate, was quickly dealt with by Ojiro's Ambipom, and 2 well-placed brick breaks. I see him. Another villain shouted. Up there. Ojiro and Ambipom quickly swing off away from the villains. I have to help the others. The tail quirk user thought. Skull Zone. We found you. The gruff villain said. Koda was surrounded them by 2 villains to his front and 1 to his back, each with a Pokemon of their own, the one behind him being a Poliwrath, and the 2 in front of him being a Liepard and Barbaracle. Just as they rushed towards him, Koda whimpered out, please help me, oh innocent Pokemon, please. Suddenly, the Barbaracle attacked and grabbed the Liepard with one hand and the 2 villains with his upper right hand and left hand. The hell? Barbaracle, what are you doing? The 2 villains shouted in protest. The 2 heard a whack and saw that the villain behind Koda was knocked out by his own Poliwrath. Before the villains could comprehend anything else, the 2 were slammed into the wall by a large claw made of shadows, and knocked unconscious. Barbaracle and Liepard were also rapidly taken down, Barbaracle from a double steel wing from behind, and the Liepard from an Absol using Axe Scissor, and Poliwrath from being slammed up and down repeatedly by Kota's Oringur. Tokoyami stepped out of the shadows to his two Pokemon, the large shadowy hand retreating back into him. "That's 11 of them down," he said. The two would give each other a thumbs up. "We're reducing their numbers as we go on. I hope it helps." Central Plaza. "Remember Izu, we are just here to see how things are going with Mr. Ozawa, okay?" Serena said, the three reaching the shore of the shipwreck zone to the Central Plaza. "Why do it reminding me every 20 seconds? Izuku asked. "Because you would feel compelled to hop into the action like a hero and possibly get your arms broken," Serena replied dryly. "She's got you there, boss." Pikachu voiced this opinion. Alright, I get it," Izuku said, as the three peeked out to see the fight. "We'll get out of here in the first sign of danger." The three students looked to see that a vast majority of the villains were on the ground, probably unconscious, same with a number of Pokemon laying down with swirls in their eyes. Only a dozen or more villains and Pokemon remained conscious and fighting, including the large purple abomination standing to the side still, the leader and his Hydreigon. Wow. All three of them thought as they watched their teacher easily beat villain after villain, and the sheer power and skill in his and 13's Pokemon. While Malamer, Cofagrigus, and Behem were dealing a few Pokemon, Aizawa, his black messy hair raised, rushed over and jumped over two villains, his scarf spread out. The two villains looked at the jumping pro, unaware of the end of the capture scarf that picked them up. Aizawa twisted in mid-air before pulling himself forward, launching him towards the villains, slamming his feet into their stomachs and onto the ground. Aizawa panted, his hair falling down to his regular messy mop-like state. He perked up in time to see the hand-covered villain racing towards him fast. First it was 23 seconds. The villain thought. "The final boss, huh?" Eraser said as he tossed his scarf towards Shigaraki, his hair rising again. Then it was 24 seconds. The villain continued mentally recounting, as he grabbed Aizawa's scarf and continued rushing towards him as Aizawa did the same. Then 20. The two reached each other. Then 17. The hand-covered villain reached out towards Eraser, the Erasure hero, responding quickly by ducking, grabbing his scarf's side, reeling it, and the villain back to slam his elbow into the villain. Izuku, Serena, and Asui smiled brightly at their teacher's successful attack, only for Asui's smile to drop to a frown. Something's wrong, Asui thought. Her worries were proven as with the two fighters, the hand-covered villain's own hand gripped and held back Eraser's elbow, the pro hero struggling to break free from the villain's grip. Then his hair fell down and the villain chuckled. "It was hard to see when you were jumping around, but I found your tell," the villain said. "It's your hair." Behind his goggles, Eraser had bloodshot, cracked, red eyes widen in alarm. "When it drops, it means you've stopped using your quirk," the villain revealed, as where his hand gripped Eraser's right elbow, the black clothing began to turn gray and spread, and then crack. The Erasure hero grunted in pain in trying to break free. "You're having to blink more often." The three students watching from afar gaped in horror at the sight. "Don't push yourself too hard now. You might just fall apart." Emphasizing the villain's words were Eraser's had elbow exposed, the skin cracking and falling apart, revealing the red muscle underneath. "Wouldn't that be a shame?" Izuku's eyes widened in horrified realization. His quirk. "I get it now," Izuku thought as he remembered the break-in yesterday, how the defenses were breached. Decay. He can decay and disintegrate anything he touches. And he's decaying Mr. Aizawa's arm. Eraser grunted as his hair raised up and punched the villain away before jumping away. "He destroyed my elbow," Aizawa thought. He quickly turned and ducked under a villain's quirk, before slamming his left fist into the villain's gut and sent him flying, his other arm hanging limply. He quickly dodged another villain's quirk, and then another, stopping as he was surrounded by three remaining villains, his and 13's Pokemon kept away by 2 Pokemon each. "That annoying quirk of yours isn't suited for drawn-out fights against big groups, is it?" the villain asked as he got up. "Don't you think you are a little out of your element here, Eraserhead? You're much better at working stealthily. You're known for surprised attacks, not head-to-head." Eraser panted exhausted. "But despite knowing that, you didn't hesitate from jumping into the middle of this fight to put your students at ease. Sure, you had your Pokemon," he gestured to Cofagrigus slamming Grumpig into his Angus, and Malamer contesting its Psybeam against the protective Golem, while a Hariyama laid defeated on the ground. And Behem teleporting and fired multiple Shadow Balls and Psybeams into his Seviper and Slaking. "But then your quirk doesn't work on Pokemon, does it? So you had yours take care of them more, and leave the rest of us to you. How smart, yet still doesn't make a difference in how out of your expertise you're in." Aizawa's hair fell down before he quickly dodged a villain's sharp claws, before wrapping him up in his scarf with one hand, then pulling him towards him, and using him as a shield against the other villain's quirk. He quickly punched the villain in the face, and roundhouse kicked the last one in the face too. He quickly turned back to the hand-covered villain, panting harder, but his hair still raised up and scarf ready. "Look at you." The villain threw his arms wide open. "Still standing. You really are so cool." He lowered his arms and leaned forwards. Oh, by the way, hero. Aizawa whirled around to see the giant, hulking, avian-looking monstrosity looming right behind him. I am not the final boss, he clarified. The monster raised his claw's hand towards an eraser and lashed out. A flying, destroyed goggle and a sprout of blood the result. Izuku gaped in absolute horror at the sight, his form quivering at the sound of loud bashing and crushing. No, he gasped out. Mr. Aizawa. The USJ entrance. Ah, black hole. The warp villain said. The quirk that sucks up matter and turns it to dust. Such an astounding power. The warp villain's form was being sucked up by 13, while the rest of the students stood behind her. However, you're primarily a rescue hero, 13. The warp villain continued. Skilled at saving people from disasters. A warp portal opened up in the warp villain's center. Consequentially, that means you have little combat experience or battlefield awareness. 13's eyes whitened and, despite the villain's analysis, sensed what was happening and immediately threw her pack, with her other hand, to the side. Catch. 13 yelled, Sato catching the pack. Looking inside he could see that it was full of pokeballs of her Pokemon. Huh? Sato said confused. But wah. Sato's question answered itself before he said it. He and the others looked as a warp gate opened up behind 13, with her own quirk backfiring on her. He opened a warp gate. 13 yelled as her quirk quickly started disintegrating her backside. How unfortunate. The warp villain chuckled. You've managed to turn yourself into dust. No? Uraraka yelled in horror. 13. Mina yelled too. I'm sorry, he got me, 13 groaned out, shutting off her quirk, but not before the backside of her costume was fully destroyed. It's up to you now, old friend. As she fell to the ground, a flash of light escaped out of the Pokeball, hidden in the sleeve of her other hand. Out of that Pokeball's light emerged an enraged Gardevoir, standing ready against the warp villain. Ah, a nice little surprise, a final gambit to keep me from your students. The warp villain said. How admirable of you, 13. But you seem to make the mistake to assume. A shadow ball flew past the students and collided against Gardevoir's back, sending her to the ground in surprise. That I didn't have a Pokemon of my own. The students whirled to where the blast came from to see a small keystone with a face. Huh? Mina questioned. Where's the Pokemon? There's only that rock. Have you kids never been told? The warp villain said, as a menacing aura surrounded and fumed from the keystone. That appearances can be deceiving. Hahaha. The keystone giggled, its cracked frowning face glowing purple before a purple fog seeped out of the cracks, and out appeared the Pokemon. Allow me to introduce a rather rare Pokemon. Truly one of its kind. The warp villain said. Spiritomb. The newly revealed Pokemon was a ghostly, swirling purple fog with large and small green orbs, with yellow centers swirling around the edges of the fog. A face formed around the middle, two green crescents, one larger than the other with a black spiral in the middle, both connected to a jagged green mouth. Jihaya. The Pokemon cried out, its cry haunting and chilling the students to the bone. What the hell is that? Sarah whimpered out, before pulling out his Pokédex, Generation 8 Pokédex, to scan the Pokemon. Spiritomb, the forbidden Pokemon. The Pokédex read off. Exactly 108 spirits gathered to become this Pokemon. Apparently, there are some ill-natured spirits in the mix. A rather fitting Pokemon for this occasion, isn't it? The warp villain asked. Not just because I'm a villain with an inherently evil Pokemon, but because this place will be your tomb. Eat it. Get out of here. Sato yelled at the chief class officer, pulling out a Pokeball of his own. We can handle these guys. Go Magic. Out of his Pokeball sprouted out a Magic, a large bipedal humanoid Pokemon with gray skin, a reptilian, short-snouted face, narrow red eyes, 4 pointed teeth, 2 on its lower and upper jaws. 3 brown ridges poked out its chest, dark red marking stripes ran down its muscular arms and black markings similar to briefs with a golden and black belt around its waist, with a red P above the middle. Yeah, we can keep them occupied. Sero said, pulling out his own Pokeball, a netball to be precise. Show him Ariados. Out of the netball, popped out Ariados, its appearance being a large red arachnid-like Pokemon. Its larger, lower body had 2 black stripes around the middle and neck of the body, 2 black spots near the rear, along with a yellow spinnerd, and 2 yellow, single purple striped protrusions along the black strap near the abdomen. 4 yellow, insectoid-like pointed legs protruded around the abdomen as well, 2 purple stripes along the legs. Its face had 2 large purple eyes with blacker eyes, 2 white mandibles and a white horn. Omastar. Shoji yelled, throwing out his own Pokeball. Omastar appeared out of the Pokeball, its main body sky blue in color, with 2 stubs for legs, 2 long tentacles for arms, 3 tentacles on each of its side, 2 large yellow eyes with vertical slits, and an oval-shaped mouth, its fangs shaped like a beak. A large pale yellow helix spiraled shell laid on its back, spikes running down its midsection. Omastar, fire hydro pump. Ariados, sludge bomb. Shoji and Sero commanded. Omastar fired a powerful blast of water, while Ariados fired a series of sludge. Spiritomb's green orb started spinning faster and glowing black, along with its face. It roared as it fired a stream of black-purple glowing rings of dark pulse. They collided against the 2 moves, the 3 moves pushing against each other. Iida, go. Iida turned to Araka, who beside 13 with Mina, the 2 holding pokeballs in hand. We'll be ready. Just go. Iida gritted his teeth, his eyes clenched, before opening them with a new determined glare. Engine. He yelled as he sped past the warp villain, steam shooting out of his mufflers. The warp villain looked between the escaping Iida, and Mina rushed off with 2 pokeballs in her hand, one given to her by Araka. She trying to escape from the wolves. I simply can't allow that, he said ominously before his figure swirled. Spiritum, take care of the girl, while I take care of the boy. Iida was rushing towards the doors before the villain reappeared in a warp gate in front of him. If other heroes arrive, it will be much harder for us to deal with All Might, the warp villain admitted. Iida attempted to stop, bracing his feet to the ground to slide to a halt, but was still getting closer and closer to the portal. I can't let them down, Iida mentally told himself. This responsibility, this trust Midoriya, Yoi Rozo, and all the class placed on me, I won't forsake it by failing. Classmates, I'll keep you safe. Before he was swallowed by the portal, Shoji rushed from the side and wrapped his body around the swirling form of the warp villain. Shoji, Iida shouted. Run, Iida. Shoji yelled, tumbling to the ground with the villain in his large grasp. I got him. Run. Iida gritted his teeth and ran again towards the doors. Meanwhile, Mina rushed to the side, tossing up Araka's Pokeball to reveal from it a Kirlia, a humanoid-looking Pokemon, its upper body primarily snow-white, with white arm to a white paw, and its body splitting around its waist to form a tutu. Its lower half, from its stomach to legs, were green and skinny. Its head included green hair, styled in twin ponytails, that covered most of its face, large red eyes, and 2 flat red horns on each side of its head. Kirlia, get her to the... Araka yelled out, only to be interrupted. Behave. Spiritum roared as his fog body grew before unleashing more power into the dark pulse, the attack blasting through Omastar and Ariado's attacks, and blasting them back. Spiritum looked towards where Mina and Kirlia were and rushed towards them. Oh no, you don't. Sato yelled as he and Machi rushed forwards to intercept Spiritum, only for their arms to go right through him. Shit, it's a ghost type. Mina and Kirlia turned to see Spiritum looking in their direction and getting closer. Mina froze in fear, unable to hear Kirlia's and Uraraka's cries to run, her legs wobbling at the forbidden Pokemon, as its orbs began swirling black again. She snapped out of her fear, just as the dark rings of dark pulse grew closer towards her. Mina. Uraraka yelled. Mina closed her eyes, waiting for her inevitable fate, only for a few seconds to go by with nothing happening. She peeked her eyes open, for it to shoot out white at what occurred. It was Gardevoir, a few scratches on its body, with a large moonblast in her hands, tanking the dark pulse, and shielding her and Kirlia. Gardevoir. Mina shouted in surprise. Gardevoir. Gardevoir grunted out as it turned back to look at Mina and Kirlia, nodding her head to the entrance. Mina, and an onlooking Uraraka, realized she was telling them to hurry to the entrance. Kirlia. Uraraka yelled. Teleport Mina to the doors. Quickly. Kirlia. Kirlia shouted and nodded. The emotion Pokemon grabbed Mina and flashed away with her in blue light. A second later, the 2 stood before the doors, Iida racing towards them. Alright, no time to freeze up now. Mina smacked her cheeks and shook her head before tossing up her Pokeball. Come on out, Goopy. The Pokeball opened up to reveal a large, moving purple sludge creature with a large open mouth and 2 eyes. A Muk. Muuk. Muk cried out cheerfully as it reached out his sludge hands to Mina, as if to scoop her up. No, Goopy, no time for cuddles. Mina said urgently. We got to burn through these doors quickly. Mina placed her hands on the door. Help me with acid spray. Muk nodded and moved to the doors, pressing his mucky hands and his mouth on the door, and started spraying out purple acid that started burning through the door. Mina joined her Pokemon and used her quirk on the doors too, her clear acid helping burn through the doors quicker. With no Mina behind her to protect, Gardevoir cried out, pouring more energy into Moonblast and shooting out towards Spiritum, the attack blasting through Spiritum's till it landed and exploded on the villainous Pokemon, it crying out horrendously as it flew back. It looks like it took a bunch of damage, Zero noted. Berg, Spiritum, is weak against Fairy. The students looked to C13, grunting out the info. It's both Ghost and Dark type, only weak to Fairy. Focus fire on it, with any type other than normal, fighting, psychic, or poison moves. The students nodded. You heard her. Zero said. Ariados, you guys keep it busy like she said, while we deal with the smoky bastard. Iida watched as Mina and Muk started burning through the doors. Great work, Ashido. Iida mentally praised. Don't worry, my classmates, I'll be back with help in a flash. Omastar magically summoned floating fossil-embedded rocks of ancient power, and hurled them towards Spiritum. The forbidden Pokemon fired dark purple beams of nightshade and destroyed them. It fired off multiple shadow balls, magic summoning rock slide and Ariado's firing pin mislead to defend. Art of War floated above Spiritomb and fired dazzling gleam onto the Pokemon. The rays of light blasted back to the ground in a thud. You impertinent children. The warp villain yelled out, breaking free of Shoji's grasp and shooting out towards Iida. You won't set one foot out those doors. Iida. Uraraka yelled. She paused and took notice of the metal brace inside the misty form of the warp villain. That's it. Come on. Come on. Iida mentally panicked. Faster. Faster. I have to get there faster. Iida looked back to see the warp villain right behind him and close in around him. Begun. The villain roared. Iida closed his eyes as the darkness began to surround him, before suddenly it floated away. Both Iida and the villain were stunned, the engine user looking back to see it was Uraraka who saved him, her hands grabbing the metal brace inside the villain's misty form, her hands lighting up as evidence of her quirk. I don't know what this quirk is specifically, but he's got some weird armor in here, so he must have a physical body here somewhere. Uraraka yelled, tossing the weightless armor to the air far. Now, run Iida. Iida nodded in thanks before continuing to run. Mina and Muck continued burning through the doors, the acid quirk girl flinching in pain, her acid tolerance spent as her hands started to burn. Come on. Mina grunted. Melt away. As she yelled, the first lights of the outside started peeking out through the melted doors. You pest. How dare you? The villain shouted in outrage, trying to zoom ahead again. Suddenly, his armor was grabbed once more by a long piece of tape shooting out of Sero's arm. Not so fast, you discount ghastly. He reeled his arm back just as Sato grabbed the tape. He pulled back and started spinning the villain in the air. Go. He yelled as he threw the warp villain far away from Iida. Iida reached the doors, a large enough hole fully opened up, Muck tending to Mina who shivered and held up her pink hands, singed purple with burns. Run, Iida. She yelled. Iida ducked and ran out the hole and to the outside. No. The warp villain roared in outrage once more. Engine boost. Iida yelled as he rushed out at high speeds to UA. He's going to call for backup. The warp villain sighed in defeat as he began to warp away. It's over. Central Plaza. To Izuku, Serena, and Ase, the three were close to spilling lunches in horror at what they saw before them. The large purple avian-headed monstrosity stood above their teacher's beaten body, its clawed right gripped tightly and painfully on Aizawa's right arm, while its left held his left shoulder down. Their teacher's head was covered by his mop of black hair, but blood splatters and the remains of his destroyed goggles lay around him. What do you think of him, Eraserhead? The students heard the decay villain chuckle. The villain stared gleefully at the scene, his eye poking through the fingers of his face hand narrowed in sick twisted glee. He's the bioengineered anti-symbol of peace. The decay villain introduced. But you can call him Nomu. The now named Nomu opened its mouth, full of razor-sharp teeth, and cried out at the sound of its name. In response, it twisted Aizawa's arms till the sounds of bone breaking, and Aizawa's cry of pain sounded off. Pythagoras, Molamer, and Behium noticed the cries and tried to rush over to Aizawa, only for their path to be blocked by the Hydreigon. It roared challengingly at them, the three Pokemon responding by surrounding it. Behium fired a Shadow Ball at it, the attack connecting, but the brittle Pokemon didn't seem to respond to it, as if it felt nothing from the attack. Molamer fired a Thunderbolt while Pythagoras attacked with Dark Pulse, the two attacks again barely causing a reaction from the Pokemons. Hydreigon roared once more and suddenly faded from their view. Before the Pokemon could have a chance to look for it, it reappeared again, in front of Molamer, encased in the blue aura of Dragon Rush. Molamer's eyes bulged wide and cried out in pain, as the Dark Dragon type slammed its body into Molamer's stomach. Just as it pushed the stunned Pokemon away, it opened its three mouths and fired three violet-purple beams of Dragon Pulse onto Molamer, blasting it away to a large explosion. Pythagoras vanished using Phantom Force and reappeared behind Hydreigon, its claws growing larger with Shadow Claw. Before it could land, Hydreigon sensed the attack and flew up above, dodging the Shadow Claws. Pythagoras only looked up in time to see its main head, and one of its mouth hands fire off Dark Pulse, while the other mouth fired Dragon Pulse. The attack slammed into Pythagoras, creating another large explosions. The ghost-type Pokemon form encased the smoke and debris. Behium warped and teleported around the enemy Pokemon rapidly, the pseudo-legendary looking around for its teleporting target. It fired a Shadow Ball at Hydreigon from behind, it warping before it can turn towards it. It warped to his side and fired an energy ball, Hydreigon whirling to fire a Dark Pulse from its mouth, hand only hit air. Behium would continue this tactic of retreat, attack, and retreat. Fed up, the brittle Pokemon roared, Dark Pulse charging up in all three mouths. It twisted its body before spinning around, unleashing the Dark Rings all around him. Behium warped to behind Hydreigon, only for Dark Pulse to land on the recently warped-in Pokemon. It cried out in pain, and began to descend. Hydreigon rushed over, all three mouths' fangs growing large and white, before clumping down on the cerebral Pokemon with crunch. The Pokemon cried as its opponent clamped down onto it with its three mouths, before spinning around and around, till its body was a brown blur, until it finally tossed it over across from Pythagoras. Hydreigon flew high, looking down on where the three Pokemon lay before charging up another attack. Its right mouth was filled with icy energy, the left mouth with yellow lightning, and the main head with burning fire. It brought the heads up before firing the tri-beam onto the 3 Pokemon, the lightning at Behium, the ice at Cofagrigus, and the fire at Molamer, 3 explosions of the 3 elements, the explosions the corners of this triangle of destruction. When the smoke cleared, all 3 Pokemon were laying on the ground, heavily bruised and defeated, the brutal Pokemon roaring in victory. Oh no. Serena whispered, hands clasped on her mouth and eyes widened in horror. Ribbit. Asui nodded, her own eyes widening in fear too. Izuku's whole body shook, eyes filled with sheer terror. That Hydreigon, he beat all 3 of them, at once. Izuku mentally whimpered in fear. They were already tired from fighting so many Pokemon and villains, but to see them get taken down so easily, it's like a nightmare. Pikachu nodded, for once the smartest Pokemon's mouth shut close, its eyes wide in terror like his trainer and the fur on its tail stuck up high in alarm. You can erase people's quirks. The decay villain said, somehow not noticing or, more likely, not caring about the destruction his Hydreigon did. It's irritating, but it's nothing truly impressive. When faced with true devastating power, you might as well be a quirkless child. Izuku's hand gripped hard on the shore, his fear and terror slowly washing away into pure anger, almost losing his composure and activating his quirk to rush in to help. Calm down, Izuku. Eevee's voice rang in his head. We are hopelessly outmatched against those monsters. You go in and not only are you dead, but so would Serena and Asui. Izuku breathed in deeply and breathed out, trying to calm his anger down as Eevee said. And those Pokemon. The decay villain continued taunting. Did you not think that they were a poor choice against my Hydreigon? A fellow dark type, and 2 types that are weak towards it. After expending all their energy fighting off all those Pokemon, they may as well be but a bunch of worthless Magikarps. The UA teacher clearly did not like that taunt. His teeth gritted into a snarl, his eyes wide in fury. He turned to look at Nomu and activate his quirk, his hair rising and his eyes glowing red. Its large purple hand crushing and breaking his arm was Nomu's response. Eraser cried out in horrible pain. Serena's hand moved from covering her mouth to her whole face. Asui croaked fearfully and backed up a bit in fear. Deku anger started to rise with a vengeance, the tiniest spark of green lightning, sparking off his clenched fist. He's breaking my bones like they're twigs. Aizawa thought. I'm positive I erased his quirk. That means he's super strong even without powers. The pro hero grunted as Nomu gripped his head and brought it upward. I think he's as strong as All Might. Nomu slammed his head into the ground so hard it cracked and formed a mini impact crater. That guy was an ass to you. I didn't like him too much. Pikachu's paw was clenched and his teeth gritted, tiny spark of electricity sparked in his cheeks. But even he doesn't deserve this. Those sick bastards. I can't watch this anymore. Serena shook her head in disbelief. Please, Izu, we have to get out here. Ribbit. Asui croaked in agreement. Izuku remained silent, his teeth gritting and fists clenched, his hatred now focusing on the abomination called Nomu, mixing in with the revulsion that he felt before. What he's doing enrages me, but why do I feel so revolted seeing this Nomu? Izuku thought, gripping his head as it started to ring. Why do I have this weird feeling that this creature shouldn't exist? Like it's a crime against nature itself. Suddenly, the Warp Gate villain appeared next to the Decay villain. Tamura Shigaraki. The Warp villain greeted his comrade. Kurogiri. Shigaraki greeted back. Did you manage to kill 13 and warp those students? The rescue hero is out of commission. Kurogiri answered. But there were students I wasn't able to disperse, and one of them got outside of the facility. Izuku's eyes widened. Someone made it out. Izuku thought. It must be Ida. He must have rushed out to get help from Yue, since he's the fastest to get there. That means help's on the way. But 13, is she? No. No, she isn't. That warp villain, Kurogiri, he said that she was out of commission. That can mean a number of things. She could still be alive. The revealed villain looked taken back by the news. He was silent for a few seconds before turning away from the warp villain. He brought his hand up to his neck and started to scratch. He scratched and scratched, then he started scratched harder and faster, then his other hand joined in scratching his neck like a glameio on a scratching post. Kurogiri, you fool. Shigaraki hissed angrily, his eye filling up with even more rage and hatred. If you weren't our warp gate, I'd tear apart every last atom in your body. He stopped his scratching with a gasp. There's no way we can win if dozens of pros show up to stop us. Shigaraki lowered his arms and spoke more calmly. It's game over. Back to the title screen. And I was looking forward to finishing this today. Damn it. The Decay villain turned to his ally. Let's go home. Serena poked her face from her hands. I heard that right. Serena lowered her hands, eyes alit with a glimmer of hope. They're leaving. Really? That's what he said. Asui replied. Serena sighed in relief. At least this nightmare can be over, she said. How about we hide in here for a bit till the villains leave and we get Mr. Aizawa? Yeah. Izuku nodded, eyes focused on the two. But you've got a bad feeling about this too, huh, Midoriya? Asui said, Serena looking at the two in confusion. Izuku nodded and hummed. Even with help on the way, it's still strange that they decide to leave right now. Izuku responded. All Might's probably on the way, so why would they leave if they want to kill him? UA is sure to beef up their security, they know that, so this is their one chance. So why leave? Is it because of the other heroes that will come? Are they on a timetable? What is their reasoning? Oh, before we leave, Shigaraki turned around and said. Let's make sure the symbol of peace is broken. His ruby red eye peeked out to look at the three of them like a madman. Let's wreck his soul. Izuku blinked, and in a split second, Shigaraki was right upon them, his hand raised towards Asui. Let's make this hurt. It was like it was in slow motion. Izuku followed the villain's hand with wide, horrified eyes. Aizawa's decaying elbow flashed in his mind. He turned slowly to see the villain's target, his mind imaging her body crumbling to dust before his eyes. By the time he turned fully, all 5 of Shigaraki's fingers made contact with Asui's shocked face. A second went by. Then 2, then 3, then 5. Nothing happened. Asui didn't decay into dust beside him, and the equally shocked Serena. Shigaraki was silent before a scoff escaped his lips. You really are so cool. Shigaraki turned to see the main responsible. Eraserhead. Aizawa glared at him with bloodshot glowing red eyes, his face covered in his own blood, grunting against the Nomu's hand on his head. Nomu slammed his head and gazed into ground. Crap. 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 Izuku and Serena panicked as they went into action, Pikachu falling off his shoulder. Serena blasted blast of water at Shigaraki, pushing him away from Asui. Izuku leapt out of the water, his body sparking in green lightning. His fear and panic quickly turned to anger and outrage. I don't care what happens, I have to save her. Get you fly the hands off of her. Izuku roared out, one for all charging in his right arm, red veins glowing around his arm, and the green lightning sparking wilder. Shigaraki shook of Serena's attack and stared at Deku in momentary fear. 100%. Smash. As Deku's fists connected, a massive gust of wind bellowed out, covering his target, the shockwave blasting the water of the lake back in waves. A fury-covering villains were blown away by the powerful wind and shockwave, and it reached and shattered the lights around the stadium. From afar, the groups of people saw and felt the power of Deku's attack, from Todoroki and Higakure taking cover behind his ice wall to Bakugo and Kirishima taking cover behind some rubble into entrance, Spiritom's foggy body stretching and scattering till it hid in the keystone. Deku panted at the rush of adrenaline, the field around him covered in dust and fog. Izuku expected to feel the pain of a broken arm after going 100% again, but it didn't come. He looked down to his arm and found it perfectly intact, not at all broken or even sprained. What? Izuku thought. My arm's not broken. How? I could only handle 5 to 6%. Could I have somehow mastered it already? The sides of Izuku's agape mouth rose as the dust started to settle. Doesn't matter right now. What does is that I landed a high. As the dust settled, Pikachu hung onto the shore, same with Asui and Serena, all 3 of them looking in fear at what they saw. Instead of Shigaraki taking the blow, it was instead the Nomu. Well, where'd he come from? Izuku looked in horror at the Nomu, its horrifying face looking down at him. Izuku looked at where his fist connected and saw his fist pressed against its stomach, but there wasn't a single scratch on it. It didn't hurt him. Izuku's mind flashed back to Asui's words back at the ship. Well, think about it. Asui's words echoed in his mind. They wouldn't have bothered planning this out so much if they didn't have a way to kill him. No way. Izuku thought as his memory turned back to what Shigaraki said about Nomu. He's the bioengineered anti-symbol of peace. Shigaraki's words haunted his thoughts with cruel glee. You're pretty powerful there, kid. Shigaraki's voice spoke out behind Nomu's hulking figure. Izuku's eyes darted quickly to Pikachu, Serena, and Asui, all paralyzed in fear at the Nomu. That's Smash, you said. Tell me, are you one of All Might's disciples? Doesn't matter. I'm done with you now. As if a trigger word was sounded, the Nomu turned back to Izuku, his hands slowly rising up. Shit. Izuku mentally cursed, turning on fully cowling and swiftly pulling back his arm, before the hulking behemoth grabbed it with his right hand. It made another attempt to swipe him with his left instead, only for Deku to react swiftly and jump over the bioengineered creature's hand, planting his hands onto his wrist. Immediately, the feeling of revulsion flared up in his mind at full force. What the hell? Before he could elaborate, he quickly shot himself forward and away from another swipe at him to slamming his into his chest, again it taking no sign of damage, and looking like it didn't even budge an inch. Is it really as strong as All Might? Izuku mentally panicked, desperately trying to ignore the sensation growing in his head that it was almost deafening. He jumped out of another attempted grab by jumping off the monster and backflipping above its clawed hand. Before Deku could settle onto the ground, it was on him again, and Deku jumped and twisted his body in mid-air to avoid the monster, its claws tearing off the hood from his suit. Deku looked at the abomination's open brain. There. That must be a weak spot, he thought as he powered up one for all. If 5% didn't work, then let's raise it up to 6%. While Deku readied his punch, Asui, Serena, and Pikachu watched silently, Asui staring at Deku with a blush on her cheeks. Reboot. 6% Detroit Smash. Izuku yelled as his fists connected with the Nomu's brain. Suddenly, the feeling of revulsion exploded and Deku's world turned dark. Before his eyes were bombarded with images that he didn't know of to be his memories, too realistic to be an illusion, and too horrifying to be his imagination. He saw a man with large lips, then a strong-looking Machamp, then pure hell. His ears ranged with the bloody screams of both man and Pokemon. Images flashed of blood everywhere, bloody hands, both the man's and Machamp's, and the two fading and blurring, till they were one in the same purple hand. The man's mouth and the Machamp's beak-like mouth roaring out blood-curdling screams before they faded and blurred again, and formed a larger beak with large razor-sharp teeth. He saw the man's eyes, then the Machamp's, and then Nomu's. A voice rang out in the darkness, a voice gruff like the Machamp's, with only two words. Help me. The darkness flashed away in light, the real world returning to Deku's senses, his fist connecting to the Nomu's brain. What in Arceus, Deku thought in horror. He looked at the Nomu's eyes, and the Nomu stared back, but instead of the Nomu's eyes, he saw his. Machamp. Deku questioned. The glint of recognition was gone in the blink of an eye and back were the Nomu's cold dead eyes, and the grip of a large hand on his wrist. Crap. Izuku managed to think before the Nomu dragged him away before him, the abomination raising its clawed hand towards him in a feral roar. As Deku struggled to break free, Asui launched her tongue and wrapped it around Deku's chest. Pikachu rushed forwards, his body sparking in electricity. Shigaraki rushing towards Asui and Serena, his hands reaching towards Asui's head and Serena's face, and Serena blasts two rising pillars of water, one in front of her and towards Shigaraki's hands towards her and the other defending Asui. Just as the hands neared the two Nomu's claw near Deku's head, an explosion rocked the USJ. The six stopped, Shigaraki and the Nomu turning towards the USJ entrance, their hands inching away from their targets. Asui and Deku stood still as they turned to the entrance. Pikachu and Serena did the same, electricity shutting off and water falling down. The Pokemon by the entrance stopped fighting and froze, so too did the students, like Mina and Uraraka who tended to 13. By the entrance, a cloud of smoke and debris formed as the remains of the USJ doors were busted wide open. The sounds of footsteps sounded as a figure walked out of cloud of debris, his yellow striped jacket in his clenched fists. Mina and Uraraka smiled brightly, as too did Curly and Muck. Shoji's mouth smirked, same with Sato, Sero, and Machoke. Serena, Asui, and Pikachu's eyes widened in joy. Izuku stared wide-eyed. A large foot slammed down that's echo reverberated throughout the facility. Have no fear, students. All Might growled, a furious frown on his face. I am here. All Might, he's here. Izuku muttered out, a tear leaking from his eyes. And he's not smiling. He barely noticed the absence of Nomu's hands or the feeling of the ground he fell on. Ah, Shigaraki growled out, ruby red eye full hatred peeked out. Looks like our game is getting a continue. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want the next part of this video, like, subscribe and comment down below, and turn on the bell notification. And also check out other videos that I have created and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.